The United States of America possesses what might just be the greatest national park system of any country in the world. Among other things, this agency administers 63 national parks, which represent the most beautiful and diverse landscapes in our nation. However, it may surprise many of you when I say only 29 of our 50 states are home to a national park. In many cases, these are what are referred to as flyover states, with very little elevation gain and natural diversity. But I believe if you look hard enough, you can find beauty in any American state. Then you have others that are unanimously considered to be gorgeous, but still don't have a national park. To prove both of these things to you guys, I'll be discussing what if every single state in America had a national park. And just a heads up, this will not be determined by feasibility. This is strictly looking at areas with the best natural beauty or unique landscapes. Now, before we get started, I'm going to list off all 29 states that do have a national park so I don't get any comments asking where Arkansas or Nevada is. In alphabetical order, there's Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, Indiana, Kentucky, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And if you're asking why I didn't include Idaho in this list despite them having 1% of Yellowstone National Park in its borders, that just isn't enough to warrant a dismissal, especially for such a beautiful state like Idaho. On the contrary, North Carolina is home to nearly half of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is why I say, yes, it already has one. With that being said, let's dive into the 21 states that are without national parks, once again going from A to Z. Let's do this. First up, we have Alabama. Now, contrary to popular belief, Alabama is home to some very nice natural scenery, particularly in the northern half of the state where the Appalachian Range begins. My pick for most worthy of being national park in Alabama may not be the absolute most beautiful place in the state, but it is different from every other national park in the southeast. Little River Canyon National Preserve covers 15,000 acres, which reminds me a lot of a smaller New River Gorge in West Virginia, which did become a national park. It contains what is often considered to be the nation's longest mountaintop river, as well as a handful of sizable waterfalls as the river drops a few tiers. Better yet, I think if you combine this with the nearby DeSoto State Park, it would work even better. Would this be one of the best national parks? I mean, probably not, but it is a beautiful area that I think would be most well fit, and I'd like to visit it at some point. Up next on our list, we have Connecticut. This was a pretty difficult one for me to decide on. While Connecticut does have some pleasant scenery, it's not a very diverse state and doesn't have that one standout place that so many other states, including many on this list, have. So I went for a rather unique option, and that's West Rock and East Rock. These two separate parks are each home to these massive rock formations jetting out of the earth. They're located on opposite ends of the city of New Haven, meaning if this were a national park, it would feel a bit too developed. Though to be fair, that hasn't stopped some national parks from being established. I don't know if I'd be a fan of traveling to a place where I'm supposed to be getting away, only to be granted views of high-rises, for example. That said, the scenery otherwise is quite nice, and it is something different from anywhere else in the state. Delaware is unfortunately a contender for the least beautiful state in America. Not only is it tiny, but there's really not much to it. Still, my vote would go to Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuge. Though I don't think this should warrant national park status, I have been impressed by many of the wildlife refuges that I've visited, and I've heard this one is particularly excellent. You'll find tons of different bird species here with emphasis on migratory birds. There's also a good chance you'll find red fox, beavers, and river otters, which does sound pretty cool. For the state of Georgia, there's a lot more on offer than first meets the eye. My pick for a national park may not be the most unique, but it is far and away the most beautiful place in the Peach State. The Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest is home to a large swath of southern Appalachia. It contains Georgia's highest peak at nearly 4,800 feet, and it's also got some highly underrated waterfalls, like Amicalola Falls, a 729-foot tall cascade, and Toccoa Falls, which is 186 feet tall. This park would feel eerily similar to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is why I don't think it needs to be one. But in all fairness, I do believe its collection of waterfalls would be superior and other scenery comparable. Up next is a super easy choice for me, and that's Idaho. Idaho is arguably the most beautiful state in America that is without a national park. And in my eyes, the part of the state most deserving of national park status by far is the Sawtooth National Forest. This would protect another chunk of the Rockies, like Rocky Mountain, Grand Teton, and Glacier National Parks. This place is home to so much vast wilderness and outstanding scenery that compares to some of the best national parks in the country. You see the images, they speak for themselves. I really don't have that much more to say here. Illinois is a mostly flat state, but in the southwest corner, you do have the Ozark Mountains branch in a little bit. What is widely considered to be the most beautiful area in Illinois is the Shawnee National Forest. This is a very lush region with some nice hiking trails and scenery, but what helps it stand out among other national forests and other national parks are its unusual rock formations jetting out of the forestry. Realistically, the only time of year this place would be deserving of national park status is the fall, in my opinion. I just don't see that many outstanding qualities that would warrant the designation otherwise. Another mostly flat state that borders Illinois is Iowa. Now this one was surprisingly easy for me because my pick has actually been tossed around to be a national park before. The Driftless region is a shared space with Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois that is home to the largest concentration of cold water streams in the world. Along with that, you've got the Mississippi River, which runs on through, and some surprising elevation change of limestone outcrops and cliffs surrounding it. While this national park wouldn't be strictly in Iowa, it is the part of the state that intrigues me the most and would be most fit to be a national park. Kansas is unfortunately another contender for least beautiful state in the country. As a matter of fact, if it's not Delaware, it's probably Kansas. There's really not a whole lot here, but I did come across a park that I think represents the state well. Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve is a significant example of the once vast tallgrass prairie ecosystem. It's most well known for its plethora of wildlife, which would be one aspect that actually could rival other national parks. But scenery-wise, it's nothing more than lush rolling hills and wildflowers, which is pleasant for sure, but definitely isn't worthy of national park status. Believe it or not, Louisiana was one of the easiest states for me to figure out in this video, and that's because they're home to a very unique area. Atchafalaya Basin is the largest wetland and swamp in the United States. It reminds me a lot of Everglades National Park in Florida, which isn't particularly beautiful per se, but does protect an extremely unique ecosystem and a variety of wildlife. In that regard, I'm both surprised this isn't a national park and would actually support it becoming one. It's one of those places where you have to go in with the right expectations, but really you're not going to find a place exactly like this anywhere else in America. Maryland is another state with an area that looks especially unique, and it's actually already part of the National Park Service. Assateague Island National Seashore likely isn't the most beautiful area in Maryland, but it definitely is the most different, and there isn't a national park quite like this. The island is the largest barrier island ecosystem in the mid-Atlantic that remains predominantly unaffected by human development. It's well known for its population of wild horses, which would definitely be unique for a national park considering the only one I've seen this in is Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. For such a small state, Maryland's got quite the variety of landscapes, and I think Assateague Island is the most appropriate to become a national park. Massachusetts was a pretty tough one for me as it shares a lot in common with Connecticut, especially when it comes to natural scenery. A pleasant state, but not one that has a lot of natural diversity, and certainly not that one standout place that could be worthy of national park status. But if I had to pick, I do think Cape Cod National Seashore would be an interesting inclusion. I do stand by the fact that we need more coastal national parks, and Cape Cod is quite famous for its coastline. I think that'd be an interesting mix with the history of the area's buildings and lighthouses, which would certainly make for a unique national park. Mississippi was another tricky one to figure out, but I eventually stumbled across DeSoto National Forest, and it's actually a very unique forest. Covering more than 500,000 acres, this unique pine forest is one of the most important protected areas of biodiversity in the Gulf Coast ecoregion. It is naturally important for the protection of longleaf pine savannas, flatwoods, and pine trees, as more than 90% of this ecosystem type has been lost in the United States. It's also got some incredible wildlife if you're lucky to find it. The downside is there really isn't too much to do here in totality, which is why I struggled to imagine it being a national park. Nebraska is another state with little to offer in terms of natural scenery, though you do have a few areas that stick out, like Scottsbluff National Monument. This is a pretty cool place to visit, as it's home to particularly tall swaths of badlands and some fascinating history. It was an important landmark on the Oregon Trail in the mid-1800s and was the second most referred to site in pioneer journals and diaries. This is because the sharp elevation of these bluffs stick out amongst the otherwise flat surroundings, which consist mostly of mixed grass prairie. It wouldn't be a particularly strong national park, but it is quite unique and has a nice blend of scenery and history. New Hampshire is one of the most incredible states on this list for natural beauty, and there's a section of the state that clearly sticks out above the rest. White Mountain National Forest consists of an area greater than 750,000 acres and is home to some of the highest elevations in the Appalachian Range. This includes Mount Washington, the highest peak not only in New Hampshire, but the entire Northeast at more than 6,200 feet. It's known for having some of the worst weather on Earth, with temperatures having reached negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit and wind speeds of up to 231 miles per hour. To top it all off, the National Forest is home to a plethora of stunning waterfalls and perhaps some of the most beautiful fall colors in the world. This is one of the first locations in this video that I think is absolutely worthy of national park status. For this next one, I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I'm tying together New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The reason being is because my top pick for a national park in both is Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, which sits almost evenly in both. This is one of the few locations in this video that I've actually been to, and I was pleasantly surprised by the scenery on offer. It's got some nice elevation change, and the Delaware River is awesome, but what stood out to me the most was the size of the waterfalls. These were absolutely stunning, and if this were a national park, these would be some of my favorite waterfalls in any of them. We've talked about the Delaware Water Gap in past videos on this channel, and I've said it's one of the more likely candidates to become a national park. We'll see what happens moving forward, but it's very possible we could see New Jersey and Pennsylvania added to the mix soon. New York is another one of the most gorgeous states without a national park, and I think it's kind of crazy that it doesn't have one. I've always said Adirondack Park has scenery that would fit in perfectly with the current lineup. The park covers a massive 6.1 million acres, making it nearly 3 times larger than Yellowstone, and if you've been there, you know how huge that place already is. Adirondack Park contains some incredible elevation change for this part of America, some outstanding hiking trails, and some of the best fall colors in the world. Unfortunately, it's not the most feasible these days, but man, would I love to see this become a national park at some point. Oklahoma is a state that at first glance you wouldn't think would have a whole lot of options. But it's a much more beautiful state than some people realize, and I struggled to choose between two really nice areas. My first thought was the Talamina National Scenic Byway as a part of the Ouachita National Forest. This is a gorgeous area that contains the largest mountain range between the Appalachian Range and the Rockies. But I also thought about the fact that this wouldn't make for too unique of a national park. On the contrary, Wichita Mountains National Wildlife Refuge is a very interesting area that looks like it would be very different from every national park. Now, I think it's interesting that this is classified as a wildlife refuge because while the primary focus may be wildlife, this place has some really surprising scenery. The highest point in the park is 2,400 feet, which is actually amazing considering everywhere around it is as flat as can be. There's some great hikes here too to finalize my point. After doing more research in this video, Oklahoma may be a state I end up traveling to in the near future. Rhode Island was a very difficult one for me because of how small the state is. It's just so tiny that there can't be a whole lot of options. There's not a lot of diversity here. But last summer, I had the opportunity to visit an island off the coast of Rhode Island called Block Island. I was really impressed by the scenery here. It's not feasible at all because virtually all of the island is inhabited, but I thought it was a stunning place with a surprisingly beautiful coastline. The cliffs get really steep in some areas, and I wasn't expecting it considering mainland Rhode Island has little to nothing in terms of elevation change. Just a really nice place, and I'd recommend a visit if you're in the area. Vermont shares a lot in common with New Hampshire, especially when it comes to natural scenery. Instead of White Mountain National Forest, Vermont's got their own Green Mountain National Forest, and I was fortunate enough to visit it last fall. The region was much more breathtaking than I could have expected, with surprisingly high mountains, incredible waterfalls, great hikes, and of course dazzling fall colors. There's not as many distinct characteristics here as there are in the White Mountains, and I wouldn't make them both national parks due to their close proximity. But on their own, they're absolutely stunning places, and an interesting thing they could do is combine them into a single national park with multiple districts. They may be in different states, but you only have to drive about 2 hours to get between them. Last but not least, we've got Wisconsin, another state with a nice variety of options to choose from. I mentioned there should be more coastal national parks, and it just so happens Wisconsin is one of the most beautiful coastlines in America. Apostle Islands National Lakeshore is home to 22 islands and Lake Superior with stunning cliffs, caves, and arches. There's lots of recreational opportunity in this park, and one of my favorites is if it gets cold enough in the winter, the National Park Service will allow people to walk across the frozen lake to check out ice caves. I've already wanted to come here for quite some time, but man, if it became a national park, I would only want to go even more. But there you have it. What if every single US state had a national park? Let me know in the comments if you agree with my choices, or if you would choose other places to represent a state. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Travel Dash. You don't miss any content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.